I was in the middle of editing a wedding gallery when my phone went dark with notifications. 47 missed calls from a 615 area code, Tennessee. I set down my coffee mug slowly, the way you do when your body understands something before your mind is willing to. I had not heard from anyone in Tennessee in 11 years. I had made sure of that. And still, sitting at my desk in Nashville, on an ordinary Wednesday morning in October, I already knew that the past had finally figured out my new address. Some things do not leave you. They just learn to wait. Growing up in Franklin, Tennessee, my family looked exactly like what you would want a family to look like. My father ran a landscaping company that had been in the area long enough to have a reputation. Neat logo on the side of the trucks, a good review average on Google, sponsors on the Little League field out by Highway 96. My mother organized the church rummage sale every spring and brought casseroles to neighbors who had surgery. People waved at her from across the parking lot at Kroger, like she was someone worth knowing. Inside the house, it was a different kind of weather altogether. My mother had a philosophy she never called a philosophy. She just called it the way things are. Crying was weakness. Asking for help was embarrassing. Struggling at something meant you weren't trying hard enough, and trying hard enough was always somehow just out of reach. My father backed every bit of it with his silence and his slow, approving smile whenever one of her lessons landed the way she intended. I was 9 the first time I understood what that meant. We had gone to the Walmart on Carruthers Parkway on a Saturday. I had asked for a model horse kit in the craft aisle, one of those cheap plastic things that came with paints and a tiny brush. My mother said no before I finished the sentence. I started crying in the aisle. Not a tantrum, just that quiet kind of crying where you're trying so hard to hold it in that your face goes blotchy and your breath gets choppy. She told me I was embarrassing the family. She told me to wait by the car. They went back inside. I stood in the parking lot for 2 hours in late August heat while people walked past me without a second look, because a child standing alone next to a pickup truck didn't look like an emergency to anyone who didn't know better. When they came out, my father had a large bag from the sporting goods section. My mother walked past me without saying a word and got into the passenger seat. My father looked at me over the truck roof and said the real world didn't give out prizes for feeling sorry for yourself. He said he owed my mother $5 because he'd bet she would still be crying when they got back. She had guessed I would have stopped. That was the first time I heard about the bets. A year later, I failed a spelling test. Not failed exactly. I got a 68, which my teacher put a small smiley face next to because she knew I had been sick that week. My mother did not draw a smiley face on anything. She drove me to the public library branch out on Paytonsville Road on a Thursday evening, when the temperature had dropped and I wasn't wearing a jacket, walked me inside and told me to sit at a table and think about what kind of person couldn't be bothered to study. She said she would be back in 45 minutes. She came back nearly 3 hours later. I had read through 2 picture books and a field guide to North American birds, and was sitting near the front desk when she walked in, because the librarian on duty had been watching me for an hour, and had started asking quiet questions I didn't know how to answer. My mother thanked her warmly, took me by the hand, and in the car told me that weakness invited worse treatment, and I had better learn that before the world taught it to me harder than she ever could. I never told anyone. I had learned not to. The year I turned 11, I got a C+ on a math test, not a subject I was ever good at. I was good at drawing at art class. The sketchbooks I kept under my bed full of horses and imaginary landscapes and floor plans for houses I would never live in. Math was a language I could not get my brain to speak no matter how long I sat with it. My teacher had already sent home a note suggesting a tutor. My mother held that note the same way she held report cards, like evidence in a case she'd been building for years. That night, I heard them in the kitchen. Their voices low, almost amused. My mother said I needed something that would stick. My father laughed and said he had an idea. The next morning, they were cheerful. That was always how I knew something was coming. They told me we were going to Opry Mills for the day. Shopping, they said. Maybe lunch. My mother let me pick which shoes I wanted to wear. My father put on a country station in the truck and drummed his thumbs on the steering wheel the whole way up I-65. I sat in the back seat and watched the exits blur past and tried to decide if this was real or if I was being prepared for something. By the time the Nashville skyline filled the windshield, my stomach had already made its decision. Opry Mills on a Saturday in October is a living thing. Every entrance feeds into a current of strollers and shopping bags and families who all seem to know exactly where they're going. We parked near the east entrance and I stayed close behind my parents because the crowd moved fast and I didn't want to lose them. Inside the food court, my mother pointed to a bench near the Auntie Anne's pretzel counter, the kind of bench that sits in the middle of foot traffic so you feel exposed from every angle. She told me to wait there. They needed to go look at something. 15 minutes, she said. Maybe 20. Don't move. I sat down. I watched the clock on my father's phone before he slipped it into his pocket. 15 minutes passed. I told myself the store was crowded. 25 minutes. I told myself they got turned around. 40 minutes. I stood up and walked 3 steps toward the nearest corridor, and then came back because I had been told not to move. And even then, with my chest already tight and my palms already damp, part of me was still more afraid of getting in trouble than of being lost. An hour in, I stopped making excuses for them. An hour and 15 minutes in, I saw my father's green truck moving slowly through the loading zone, visible through the glass doors at the far end of the food court. My whole body moved before my brain caught up. I ran toward the glass and waved both arms the way you wave when you're drowning in a crowd, when you need someone to see you above everything else. The truck slowed. I could see my mother in the passenger seat, turning toward me. My father was driving and he was smiling. Not the smile of a man who had been looking for his daughter and found her. The smile of a man watching something go exactly the way he planned. My mother rolled down her window. I was close enough to hear her through the glass, even over the noise of the lot. She cupped her hand to her mouth and called out in this bright, laughing voice, "Bet you $40 you can't find your way home, Jenny." And then she laughed. My father lifted his hand off the wheel in a small wave, like he was leaving a friend's cookout. The truck eased forward into traffic and disappeared. I stood at the glass door long enough that a family of 4 had to step around me. I had $6 and some change in my jacket pocket. No phone, no idea what the mall's address was or how far it was from Franklin, or what bus, if any, ran anywhere close to where we lived. I was 11 years old and I had just watched both of my parents choose to leave. I went back inside because the October air had gone cold, and I didn't know what else to do. I walked the length of the mall twice, staring into store windows without seeing anything, wiping my face every few minutes because I had been trained to be ashamed of crying in public. I avoided the mall cops because my mother had always said that involving authority figures only made everything worse. I avoided asking strangers for help for the same reason she had given me 100 times. It made you look weak, and weak people invited problems. The cruelest part of what they built in me was exactly that. They had spent years making sure I wouldn't ask for help, and then they left me in a place where help was the only way out. The woman who found me was working in a candle shop near the South Corridor. She was in her 60s, with reading glasses pushed up onto her head, and the kind of unhurried way of moving that belongs to people who have stopped being in a hurry. I had walked past her store 3 times. The 3rd time, she stepped out to the doorway and asked if I was okay. I lied first. I said I was waiting for my parents. She asked how long. I said I didn't know. She asked if I had eaten anything since breakfast. I don't know why that question was the one that broke something loose, but it did. I started crying, the kind of cry that has been waiting a long time and is not polite about arriving. I told her everything. That they had told me to wait and then driven past and laughed, that my mother made a bet, that I had $6 and no phone and didn't know how far away home was. She did not tell me to calm down. She did not tell me I was overreacting. She put her hand lightly on my shoulder and said, "Stay right here with me," and went inside to call mall security. Security arrived in 4 minutes. They called Nashville Metro Police. 2 officers took my statement while a 3rd reviewed camera footage from the loading zone entrance, which clearly showed my parents' truck slowing at the curb, a child running toward the glass, and the truck pulling away. That footage was logged as evidence. I did not know what that meant at the time. I only knew that the adults around me had stopped looking at me the way adults usually looked at children who were upset in public. They were looking at me like something serious had happened. Because something serious had. When the officers finally reached my parents by phone, I was sitting in the mall's security office with a bottle of water I couldn't drink and a bag of pretzels someone had brought from the counter nearby. I could only hear one side of the call. The officer's voice was professional and patient right up until it wasn't. He asked if they were returning to Nashville immediately. There was a pause. He said, "Ma'am, I understand you believe this was a parenting decision. I need you to understand that leaving an 11-year-old unattended in a public mall is child abandonment under Tennessee law. I need you to return right now." Another pause. He said, "No, ma'am, tonight." They came back. They arrived with their arms crossed, and my mother's chin at that angle she used when she wanted people to know she found them beneath her. My father told the officer they had been no more than 15 minutes away, and this had been a planned exercise in self-reliance. The officer looked at him for a moment without saying anything, the way people look at something they don't quite believe they're seeing. A social worker was called. I spent that night with a foster family in Brentwood while the adults sorted through what came next. I remember lying in a guest room with a nightlight plugged into the wall and thinking that the mattress was softer than the one at home. I fell asleep before I meant to, which felt like its own kind of proof that I had been carrying more weight than an 11-year-old should. The court process was slow and careful, and not at all how it looks in movies. My parents hired a lawyer and showed up to every hearing with the same composed, slightly offended energy they brought to everything they believed was beneath them. They did not deny leaving me at the mall. They said it had been thoughtful and purposeful. They used the word character a lot. They used the word resilience. The judge had likely heard every version of those words before. The court-appointed evaluator's report used different words: pattern of emotional manipulation, deliberate endangerment, chronic use of fear as a parenting tool. Reading those words felt like having a window opened in a room I hadn't known was airless. The judge asked if I wanted to return home with monitoring. I said no. Quickly enough that I surprised myself. My mother looked at me like I'd said something in a language she didn't recognize. My father pressed his lips together. The judge did not flinch. The reunification program was offered. 2 years of supervised visits, parenting classes, regular evaluations, oversight from people who would have access to the private version of my family rather than the public one. My parents sat with that option for less than a week. Then they signed the papers to voluntarily terminate their rights. They did it rather than allow anyone with a clipboard to tell them how to live in their own house. I found out later that my father told people at church the state had overstepped. He told my younger sister that I had been manipulated by the system. He spent years building a version of the story that protected them from the only narrative that was actually true. The family I was placed with eventually adopted me. My foster father was a high school history teacher who had ink on his hands most evenings from grading papers. My foster mother taught ceramics at a community arts center and had a laugh that came from somewhere real. They had a dog named Biscuit who slept on the foot of my bed and didn't ask for anything except to be nearby. They knocked before entering my room. They did not yell. When I left dishes in the sink, they asked me to wash them. That was it. That was the whole consequence. It took me years to stop flinching at kindness, years to stop reading neutrality as the calm before something terrible. But they stayed, and staying turned out to be the thing that mattered most. I took their last name when the adoption was finalized, Oaks. I let Jenny Howell go the way you let go of a coat that was never the right's. Laura Oaks was the name I carried out of Tennessee and into college in Nashville, into the photography program that taught me how to make something beautiful with light, into a career shooting weddings for people who were choosing, on purpose and in public, to stay. I loved that work for reasons I couldn't always explain out loud. I blocked every number connected to my parents before I graduated. I changed my contact information twice over the years when they found workarounds. I did not visit Franklin. I did not look them up. Most weeks, I could go the whole week without thinking of them, which felt like a kind of freedom I had not known was available to me when I was 11. Then came the 47 missed calls. The voicemail was from my younger sister. I hadn't heard her voice since she was small enough that her feet didn't touch the floor when she sat in a kitchen chair. Her voice was steady but tired in the way voices get when someone has been holding something heavy for too long. She said our father had a heart attack 8 months ago. She said our mother had been diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's. She said the company was gone. Not struggling, gone. A former employee had posted something on the local next door 2 years earlier, after our mother commented on a neighbor's parenting post about how children needed more accountability and less coddling. The former employee recognized the name and wrote, simply, that she personally knew of a case where this woman had left her 11-year-old daughter at a mall in Nashville and laughed about it from the truck window. From there, it spread the way things spread now. Facebook, a local subreddit. Someone found a brief public court record tied to a child endangerment investigation. Someone else recognized the company name. Contracts stopped, canceled. Clients called to say they'd be going elsewhere. Church friends stopped calling. The Franklin community, which had protected them for decades with politeness and good manners, withdrew the same way. My younger sister said she had requested the court records 6 months earlier, after she had a son of her own, and started wondering why exactly it was that she had grown up without a sister. Reading them, she said, felt like the floor dropping out from under her. She had cut contact with our parents shortly after. She said they wanted me to come. She said she was calling because she wanted me to hear it from someone who wasn't going to lie to me about why. I sat with my phone on the kitchen table for a long time. My husband sat across from me and didn't say anything, which is one of the reasons I married him. He waited until I was ready and then he said, "Whatever you decide, I'm here." My foster mother, when I called her, said the same thing she always said when I faced something hard: make sure you're doing it for yourself and not for them. I flew into Nashville and rented a car and drove to the address my sister had given me. The house was a rental, small, in a part of Antioch I didn't recognize. The landscaping out front was overgrown in a way that felt like a specific kind of irony. My father answered the door. He was thinner than I remembered and slower, and the performance of himself that had always been so effortless looked like it cost something now. My mother was in a chair in the living room. Her hands were moving slightly in the way that Parkinson's moves things against your will. She said my old name when she saw me. I said once, "It's Laura." She nodded and looked down. My father said they had made mistakes. That word, mistakes. The word people reach for when the truth is too specific to be comfortable. I told them a mistake was missing an exit on the freeway. A mistake was buying the wrong size at the store. What they did was a decision they made together, laughed about together, and defended in a courtroom together. They left an 11-year-old girl in a mall with $6 because they thought her fear was useful to them, and then they spent years telling a smaller version of that story to protect themselves. My father started to say something. I didn't stop talking. I told them the company was gone and the standing was gone, and neither daughter was beside them because the story they told themselves about what they were doing didn't hold. It never holds. Children grow up. Evidence stays on record. Communities have long memories once they start looking. My mother asked if I could forgive them. I told her forgiveness wasn't a service I owed to people who only came looking for me when their options ran out. I had not been hard to find. I had simply not been worth finding until now. That was its own answer. I stood up. My father asked if this was really it, if this was how it ended. I looked at him. I had rehearsed many versions of what I would say in that room, over many years, in therapy offices and in the car alone and in the dark after a nightmare. None of the rehearsed versions felt right when I was actually standing there. What came out was quieter than I expected and more final than anything I had practiced. You bet $40 I couldn't find my way home. I found something better than home, and I never left you a forwarding address. I walked out. The air in the parking lot was cold and thin and smelled like November. I sat in the rental car for a few minutes with my hands on the steering wheel and my eyes on the middle distance, not crying, not triumphant, just present in my own body in a way that felt different from before. Lighter, maybe, or just done. On the flight back to Asheville, I thought about the girl who had stood in that mall food court, watching a green truck pull away from the curb, convinced that being left meant being unwanted forever. She had been wrong about that. Being left by those two particular people meant exactly nothing about her worth. It only meant something about theirs. There is a version of this story where I say cruelty made me stronger. I don't tell that version anymore. Cruelty made me watchful and careful and very good at recognizing when a room isn't safe. It took years of actual love, chosen love, the love of people who stayed without keeping score, to undo enough of that to let me rest. That is the true cost of what my parents called a lesson. It doesn't build anything. It only makes the work of healing longer. I went home to my husband and my dog and my editing desk and the gallery of someone else's wedding day waiting on my screen. Two people looking at each other like the world had gotten something right for once. I sat down, picked up my coffee, and got back to work. The past had finally gotten the answer it came looking for, and I had gotten to give it in my own voice, on my own terms, 11 years too late and exactly on time.